everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Michael Greger, coming to you live from my new treadmill. Just got it Wednesday. So quiet, so smooth. I don't think I'm ever gonna want to get off of it. Yesterday, racked up 75,000 steps, hoping today to make sextuple digits. We will see. I'm currently sheltering in place until the world opens back up. Here in Washington State, which just recently opened up eligibility for the vaccine to everyone. And so finally in line to get my shot while I research how not to age on the latest in longevity research, tons of research, but I should be able to get the book out December 2022. And hopefully then I will resume my speaking schedule and come to your hometown in 2023. Before hunkering down to write the new book, though, I had to script out an entire year's worth of videos for NutritionFacts.org so I could truly immerse myself in the longevity research piece. And it is from this large batch of queued videos where I pull videos for the various webinars I've been doing every month or so. And so that's where this webinar came about on SIBO and leaky gut. Now, I know in the last webinar, I did the fun giveaway thing, name that fruit. I was hoping it would become a regular thing, but alas, evidently Zoom could not handle it. There were so many thousands of people chatting in answers at the same time that Zoom crashed on the computer that was recording it. Thankfully, we had a backup. And it's possible it was a totally random occurrence, but that has never happened before. And so I've been asked to cool it with the fruit contests. But maybe when I'm back on the road, right, we can do it face to face and then maybe eat all the entries in the after party. So looking forward to getting back out there. Anyways, are you ready to learn everything I think there is to know about SIBO? All the sneak peek videos I'm going to show are eventually going to be up on NutritionFacts.org over the next few months, but you're going to see them all right here, right now. But first, some housekeeping logistics. If at any time you run into technical difficulties, there are live chat room staff standing by. Let me paste that link in the chat. With so many people chatting, I don't know if people will even be able to see it, but there it is. I just pasted the link. Now, if they're unable to help, we also have NutritionFacts.org staff standing by too, though presumably if Zoom can't help, I don't know what we could do, but we of course want to avail ourselves to you. So I'm going to just put that in the chat as well. All right. Please reserve the Q&A button that you see in the Zoom window there to ask content questions. The webinar is only going to go for an hour. Super quick, way too fast hour. I have reserved some time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to add your questions anytime throughout the webinar, and the Nutrition Facts team will compile them all to be answered at the end, particularly the most common questions that come through. You may want to wait to see if your question is actually answered in the actual webinar, or you can just fire it away by clicking the Q&A button. You don't have to worry about taking notes or anything, because after the webinar is over, we are not only going to send you a full recording of it, but also a free link to download all the videos at high definition so you can see the videos in all their full resolution glory. All right, let's get started. Let me start with a video entitled, "Are Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth, SIBO, Tests Valid?" Let's find out. Gastrointestinal symptoms like abdominal pain and bloating account for millions of doctor visits every year. One of the conditions that may be considered for such a nonspecific presentation of symptoms is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth,
a concept that has gained popularity on the internet. In addition to certain clinical research circles, SIBO is broadly defined as the excessive growth of bacteria in the small intestine, and is typically treated with antibiotics. But dispensing antibiotics to patients with such nonspecific common symptoms is not without risks. You could be fostering antibiotic resistance, there could be side effects, and wiping out your good bacteria could set you up for an invasion of bad bugs like C. diff, all for a condition that may not even be real. Even alternative medicine journals admit that SIBO is being overdiagnosed, creating confusion and fear. SIBO testing is overused and overly relied upon. Diagnoses are often handed out quickly and without adequate substantiation. Patients can be indoctrinated into thinking SIBO is a chronic condition that cannot be cleared and will require lifelong management. This is simply not true for most, and is an example of the damage done by overzealousness. The monster that we now perceive SIBO to be may be no more than a phantom. The traditional method for a diagnosis was a small bowel aspiration, an invasive test where a long tube is snaked down your throat to take a sample and count the bugs down there. This method has been almost entirely replaced with breath testing. See, normally a sugar called glucose is almost entirely absorbed in the small intestine, so it never makes it down to the colon. So if there is bacterial fermentation of that sugar, that suggests you have bacteria up in your small intestine, and can detect that fermentation because the bacteria produce specific gases that get absorbed in your bloodstream and then are breathed out from your lungs, which can then be detected with a breathalyzer-type machine. Previously, a sugar called lactulose was used, but lactulose breath tests weren't found to reliably detect the overgrowth of bacteria, so researchers switched to glucose. But when glucose was finally put to the test, it didn't work either. The bacterial load in the small intestine was similar for those testing positive or negative, so that's not a useful test either. It turns out glucose can make it down to your colon after all. They labeled the glucose dose with a tracer, and found that almost half of the positive results from glucose breath tests were false positives, because they were just fermenting it down in their colon, where your bacteria are supposed to be. So patients incorrectly labeled with SIBO may undergo multiple courses of antibiotics for a problem they don't even have. Why do experts keep recommending breath testing, then? Oh, you mean the experts at the conference supported by a breath testing company, most of whom had personally received funds from SIBO testing or antibiotic companies? And even if we could properly diagnose it, does it even matter? In those with digestive symptoms, there is a range of positivity for SIBO from approximately 4% to 84%, all over the map, and there may be no difference in symptom scores between those testing positive versus those testing negative, so testing positive could mean anything. Who cares if some people have bacteria growing in their small intestines if that doesn't necessarily correlate with symptoms? Now, antibiotics can make people with irritable bowel-type symptoms diagnosed with SIBO feel better, so doesn't that prove SIBO was the cause? No, because it can make just as many people feel better who are negative for SIBO. Currently, rifaximin is most often used for SIBO, but it's not FDA approved for SIBO, so the cost can be prohibitive for SIBO. So even if you have good insurance, you may be shelling out of pocket as much as $50 a day, and you typically take it for 2 weeks. And while antibiotics may help in the short term, they may make things worse in the long term. Those who are given a course of antibiotics are more than 3 times as likely to report more bowel symptoms 4 months later than controls. So what can we do for these kind of symptoms? That's exactly what I'm going to turn to next.
All right, I just realized, completely independent of the topic, this is actually people's first sneak peek. Everyone who just watched that is the first sneak peek at our new video format. Before the pandemic, it was me against a green screen talking about the studies as they flash by. then I couldn't get into a recording studio. And so we had to have some kind of we had to go back to just showing the papers. And we're always trying to figure out what's the best way to show it. I think before there was so much movement of pages on the screen, it got a little disorienting, hard to watch. So this is our new attempt where there's a little less movement, the quotes come out a little clearer. So yeah, I'd actually be interested to know what people think. But this is the future, at least the near future of NutritionFacts.org in terms of what the videos are going to look like. I hope people liked it. I didn't even realize that this webinar would be people's first sneak peek, but very cool. All right. Anyway, getting back to the subject at hand, I just want to reiterate that even if we could accurately diagnose SIBO, if there's no difference in the symptoms between those testing positive and those testing negative, what's the point of even there being a clinical entity called SIBO, right? It turns out it may not be the number of bacteria growing in your small intestine, but rather the type of bacteria, which can be connected with diet. I give you, next video, fiber versus low-FODMAP for SIBO symptoms.
Gastrointestinal symptoms like abdominal pain and bloating account for millions of doctor visits every year. One of the conditions that may be considered for such a nonspecific presentation of symptoms is SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, a concept that has gained popularity on the internet. In addition to certain clinical research circles, SIBO is broadly defined as the excessive growth of bacteria in the small intestine, and is typically treated with antibiotics. But dispensing antibiotics to patients with such nonspecific common symptoms is not without risks. You could be fostering antibiotic resistance, there could be side effects, and wiping out your good bacteria could set you up for an invasion of bad bugs like C. diff, all for a condition that may not even be real. Even alternative medicine journals admit that SIBO is being overdiagnosed, creating confusion and fear. SIBO testing is overused and overly relied upon. Diagnoses are often handed out quickly and without adequate substantiation. Patients can be indoctrinated into thinking SIBO is a chronic condition that cannot be cleared and will require lifelong management. This is simply not true for most, and is an example of the damage done by overzealousness. The monster that we now perceive SIBO to be may be no more than a phantom. The traditional method for a diagnosis was a small bowel aspiration, an invasive test where a long tube is snaked down your throat to take a sample and count the bugs down there. This method has been almost entirely replaced with—
Sorry about that. I was playing the wrong video. Okay, sorry. Now on to video 2.
If you test more than 1,000 patients suffering from irritable bowel-type symptoms such as excess gas, bloating, diarrhea, and abdominal pain for longer than 6 months, who don't appear to have anything more serious going on, such as inflammatory bowel disease, a significant percentage were found to be suffering from lactose intolerance to the milk sugar lactose. In infancy, we have an enzyme in our small intestines that digests milk sugar, but most of us understandably lose it after weaning. Although a genetic mutation has led to the persistence of the enzyme in a minority of adults, about 75% of the world's population malabsorb lactose and have lactose intolerance after age 30. A third, though, were diagnosed with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The evidence for SIBO and IBS symptoms is shrouded in controversy, predominantly because of the fact that the breath tests used in clinical practice to diagnose SIBO are not valid, as I explored in the last video. And it's not even clear what the implications are of having more versus less bacteria growing in your small intestine, since the number don't seem to correlate with symptoms. It turns out it's not the number, but the type. It's the kind of bugs you have growing in your small intestine. So it's small intestinal microbial dysbiosis, not overgrowth in general, but the wrong kind of growth that appears to underlie symptoms associated with functional gastrointestinal disorders like irritable bowel syndrome. How can you prevent this from happening? Well, the symptoms appear to be correlated to a significant drop in the number of Prevotella species. Remember them? Prevotella are healthy fiber feeders, suggestive of a higher fiber intake in healthy individuals, while the bugs found more in symptomatic patients ate sugar, which may reflect a higher dietary intake of sugars. Yes, but correlation doesn't mean causation. To prove cause and effect, you have to put it to the test, which is exactly what they did. Switching a group of healthy individuals who habitually ate a higher fiber diet to a more typical standard American low-fiber diet with lots of sugar produced striking results within just 7 days. First, 80% developed new gastrointestinal symptoms out of the blue, such as bloating and abdominal pain, that resolved on resumption of their more healthful, habitual, higher fiber diet. And the diet-related changes in the small intestinal microbiome were predictive of symptoms and linked to an alteration in intestinal permeability. In other words, they developed a leaky gut within 7 days. And while some went from SIBO positive to SIBO negative, or SIBO negative to SIBO positive, it didn't matter, since the number of bacteria growing didn't correlate with symptoms. It was the type of bacteria growing. And no wonder their guts got leaky. Short-chain fatty acid levels plummeted. Those are the magical byproducts that our good gut bugs make from fiber, which play an important role in intestinal barrier integrity, meaning keeping our gut from getting leaky. So while we don't have sound data that something like a low-FODMAP diet has any benefit for SIBO symptom patients, there have been more than a dozen randomized controlled trials putting fiber to the test, and overall, there was a significant improvement in symptoms among those randomized to increase their fiber intake. That may actually help explain why high-fiber plant-based diets may prevent so many common diseases, the effect such diets have on the composition and metabolic activity of our microbiome. Our good gut bugs take the plant residues like fiber and produce health-promoting and cancer-suppressing metabolites like those short-chain fatty acids, which have profound anti-inflammatory properties. All the evidence points to a physiological need for about 50 grams of fiber a day, which is the amount contained in the traditional African diet and associated with the prevention of westernized diseases. That's approximately twice what's typically recommended and 3 times more than what most people are getting day to day. Perhaps it should be no surprise we need so much. Even though we split from chimpanzees millions of years ago, there's still broad congruency in the composition of our respective microbiomes to this day. While they're still eating their 98 to 99% plant-based diets to feed their friendly flora with fiber, we've largely removed fiber-rich foods from our food supply.
Okay, sorry about that. I had started that first video again, but caught it after a little while. I'm always doing a million things while these videos are playing. But all right, okay, we're good. Okay. Again, it's not about treating SIBO, since it doesn't matter if we have bugs growing in our small intestines or not. But the way to treat SIBO symptoms that have been ascribed to this syndrome that is meaningless, is to feed the good bugs, and you do that with fiber and resistant starch, so-called prebiotics, which are found concentrated in whole grains, especially groats, whole intact grains like rye berries or barley groats. My whole brole bowl thing, I did a recipe recently using some brole, which stands for barley, rye, oats, lentils, or I actually did some kind of what did I do? I added sorghum and a type of millet, and anyway, there's lots of ways you can do it. Lots of different groats out there. So intact whole grains and legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. Actually has the most per serving. And so, I mean, that's really the only way you're going to nail, at least easily nail, the 50 grams of fiber a day that we need. Though, of course, all whole foods have fiber, right? Processed foods have little or none, and animal foods have zero. And the common fiber supplement psyllium, sold as Metamucil, is useless in this regard since it's non-fermentable by our friendly flora, right? It can help with constipation, but our good gut bacteria can't actually eat it. You actually have to eat real foods, and it's particularly those drier foods like whole grains and legumes have the most fiber, just because most fruits and vegetables are mostly water, between 80 and 90% water. And so, yes, it has fiber, but you eat a whole bunch, and there's actually just a little fiber in there, as opposed to groats and beans. All right, so eat your hummus is the answer here. But all right, let us move on. So we are going to move on now to a focus on leaky gut, with a video, if I get the video right this time, foods to avoid to prevent a leaky gut. Let's find out.
Intestinal permeability, the leakiness of our gut, may be a new target for disease prevention and therapy. With all of its little folds, our intestinal barrier covers a surface of more than 4,000 square feet. That's bigger than a tennis court, and requires approximately 40% of our body's total energy expenditure to maintain. Mounting evidence implicates the disruption of intestinal barrier integrity in the development of numerous ailments, such as inflammatory bowel disease. Here, researchers measured intestinal permeability using blue food coloring. It stays in your gut if you're healthy, but can be detected in the blood of extremely sick individuals as their gut barrier breaks down. You don't have to end up in the ICU to develop a leaky gut, though. Simply taking some aspirin or ibuprofen can do the trick. Indeed, taking 2 regular aspirin or 2 extra-strength aspirin just once can increase the leakiness of your gut. These results suggest even healthy individuals should be cautious with aspirin use, as it may result in gastrointestinal barrier dysfunction. What about buffered aspirin? It doesn't make any difference. Both regular aspirin and bufferin produced multiple erosions in the inner lining of the stomach and intestines. Put a scope down people's throats, and you can see extensive erosions and redness inside 90% of people taking aspirin or bufferin in their recommended doses. How many hours does it take for the damage to occur? None. It happens within 5 minutes. Acetaminophen, sold as Tylenol in the U.S., would be a better choice, unless you have problems with your liver. And rather than making things better, vitamin C supplements appeared to make the aspirin-induced increase in gut leakiness even worse. Interestingly, this may be why NSAID drugs like aspirin, ibuprofen, and naproxen are involved in up to 25% of food-induced anaphylaxis. In other words, increasing the odds of life-threatening food allergy attacks by more than tenfold, presumably because these drugs increase the leakiness of the intestinal barrier, causing tiny food particles to slip into the bloodstream. OK, but why can exercise increase risk too? Strenuous exercise, like an hour at 70% of maximum capacity, can divert so much blood to the muscles away from your internal organs that it can cause transient injury to your intestines, causing mild gut leakiness. But this can be aggravated if athletes take ibuprofen or any of the other NSAID drugs, which is unfortunately all too common. Alcohol can also be a risk factor for food allergy attacks for the same reason, increasing gut leakiness. But cut out the alcohol, and your gut can heal up. What other dietary components can make a difference? Elevated consumption of saturated fat, which is found in meat, dairy, and junk, can cause the growth of bad bacteria, which make the rotten egg gas hydrogen sulfide, which can degrade the protective mucus layer. It is said to be clear that high-fat diets in general negatively impact intestinal health by disrupting the intestinal barrier system through a variety of mechanisms, but most of the vast array of studies cited on the negative effects of high-fat diet on gut leakiness were done on lab animals or in a petri dish. You don't know for sure until you put it to the test. Rates of obesity and other cardiometabolic disorders have increased rapidly in parallel with a transition from traditional lower-fat diets to higher-fat diets. We know a disturbance in our good gut flora has been shown to be associated with a high risk of many of these same diseases, and studies using rodents suggest that a high-fat diet unbalances the microbiome and impairs the gut barrier, resulting in disease. To connect all the dots, though, we need a human interventional trial, and here we go, a 6-month, randomized controlled feeding trial on the effects of dietary fat on gut microbiota, and indeed, higher fat consumption appeared to be associated with unfavorable changes in the gut microbiome and pro-inflammatory factors in the blood. And note, this wasn't meat and dairy. The researchers just swapped in refined carbs in place of refined fats, like white rice and white flour, for oil. These findings suggest countries westernizing their diets should advise against increasing intakes of dietary fat, while countries that have already adopted westernized diets should consider cutting down. So far, we've discussed things to prevent a leaky gut. What about foods to heal a leaky gut? That's what we'll cover next.
Okay, so damage to your stomach and intestinal lining within 5 minutes of taking an ibuprofen. Right? Think about that the next time you have a headache. And if you say, wait a second, I need ibuprofen because I have painful periods or something, check out NutritionFacts.org about all the things that work as good as or better than ibuprofen, like ginger powder, ground ginger, you can get it in any store, and don't cause damage, actually protect your gastrointestinal lining. Anyway, as I said, just to reiterate, also avoid alcohol, cut down on saturated fat and fat intake in general. I know, see, normally when you're able to watch videos on YouTube or NutritionFacts.org, you can rewind. I know there's so much information. You can watch it again, you can watch it slower, you can pause. And so that's why I just to reiterate, those I think are the takeaways from that video. But I ended that video with kind of a setup for the last one we're going to watch today before taking questions, and that is how to heal a leaky gut with food.
Our intestinal tract is the largest barrier between us and the environment. More than what we touch or breathe, what we eat is our largest exposure to the outside world. Normally, our entire gastrointestinal tract is impervious to what is inside of it, allowing our body to pick and choose what comes in or out. But there are things that may make our gut leaky, and chief among them is our diet. What happens is the standard American diet can cause gut dysbiosis, meaning a disruption in our gut microbiome, which can lead to intestinal inflammation and a leaky intestinal barrier. Then tiny bits of undigested food, microbes, and toxins can slip uninvited through our gut lining into our bloodstream and trigger chronic systemic inflammation. To avoid this dysbiosis and intestinal inflammation, plants should be preferred. Vegetarian diet gut bacteria are associated with intestinal microbiome balance, high bacterial biodiversity, and integrity of the intestinal barrier. They tend to suffer from markedly fewer uremic toxins like indole and P. cresol, and because fiber is the primary food for our gut microbiome, the gut bacteria of those eating plant-based diets produce more of the good stuff, the short-chain fatty acids that fulfill a protective and nourishing role for the cells lining our gut, ensuring the preservation of the intestinal barrier. Plant fiber is of prime importance to the preservation of intestinal barrier integrity, but you can't know for sure until you put it to the test. People were given whole grains, beans and lentils, fruits, vegetables, and nuts and seeds, and got a significant reduction in zonulin levels. Zonulin is a protein responsible for the disassembling of the tight junctions between gut lining cells, and so it's a biomarker that reflects an impairment of the intestinal barrier. In other words, zonulin is considered to be a useful marker of a leaky gut. But since adding all those plants seem to lower levels, that may imply that appropriate fiber intake helps to maintain the proper structure and function of the intestinal barrier. But whole, healthy plant foods have a lot more than fiber. How do we know it's the fiber? And the study didn't even have a control group. That's why they say gut permeability might be improved by dietary fiber to prove cause and effect. It'd be nice to have a randomized, double-blind crossover study where you compare the effect of the same food with or without fiber, and here we go. People were randomized to pasta with or without added fiber, and there was a significant drop in zonulin levels in the added fiber group, so fiber does appear to improve gut leakiness. Any plant foods in particular that may help? Curcumin, the yellow pigment in the spice turmeric, can help prevent the intestinal damage done by ibuprofen-type drugs, but that's in rats. Similar protection was noted for the broccoli compound sulforaphane, but that was in mice. No human studies on broccoli yet, but there was a study on 3 days of the equivalent of about 2 to 3 teaspoons a day of turmeric, which did reduce the gastrointestinal barrier damage caused by exercise. Less may work too, but no smaller doses have been put to the test. If you ask alternative medicine practitioners what treatments they use for a leaky gut, number 1 on the list, after reducing alcohol consumption, is zinc. Zinc doesn't just protect against aspirin-like drug-induced damage in rats. When put to the test in a randomized trial of humans, the same thing was found. The NSAID drug indomethacin caused a 3-fold rise in gut permeability, as one would expect from that class of drugs. But when they were also taking zinc, this prevented the rise in permeability, strongly suggesting a small intestinal protective effect. The dose they used was massive, though, 75 milligrams a day. That's nearly twice the tolerable upper daily limit for zinc. What about getting zinc just at regular food doses? There was a significant improvement in gut leakiness even with a dose of just 3 milligrams of zinc, suggesting that even relatively low zinc supplementation may work. You can get 3 extra milligrams of zinc in your daily diet eating a cup of cooked lentils.
Any video that ends with lentil soup is a good video, as far as I'm concerned. All right, once again, the takeaway from that video, as far as I'm concerned, is fiber, fiber, fiber. All right, we evolved eating probably in excess of 100 grams of fiber a day. If you remember, you can watch that video Paleo Poo. If you type in Paleo Poo into NutritionFacts.org, talks about coprolites, human coprolites, fossilized feces. We have a sense of what we were eating long time ago, and estimating over 100 grand, triple-digit fiber intakes. That's massive amounts of plant matter. That's what our body is used to, and our body just does not seem to work well without it. And where's fiber most concentrated? In beans, which is also where zinc is concentrated, so you can get the best of both worlds. Why do you think in the Daily Dozen, I suggest people should be eating legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, lentils, 3 times a day, or 3 servings at least, which is also what the American Institute for Cancer Research, the kind of most prestigious body looking at cancer and diet, also recommends whole grains and legumes 3 times a day. Anyway, all right, it is time for your questions. Let me pull up the questions. Actually, I forgot. We did this last time, the last webinar. We get so many gazillions of questions that it takes the staff a while to comb through and see which ones are the most common ones, etc. So we're actually going to take a 5-minute break, allow the staff to pull them all together, and then we'll come back and answer questions for the rest of the time. So let me do that right now. Hold on. Hold on. Where's my little Zoom thing? Zoom. There we go. Okay. Okay. All right, we are back, and let's get our list of questions. Oh, if I could just add this, ask the staff to add something to the Slack channel where the questions are. So it'll pop right back up, and I will then start and be able to hold on to it. Just write anything in there and it should give me a new message. Let me see. There we go. Okay, we are starring that puppy. Okay, here I have a long list of questions here. I'm going to see how many I can get through. Okay, first one on the list is it possible that a plant-based diet, like beans and legumes, specifically beans and legumes, causes SIBO-type symptoms or gastrointestinal pain? What can help with excessive gas and bloating, especially from legumes? That's a fantastic question. Kudos to the staff for popping that up first. People who have spent their lives slathering their guts with cheeseburgers and milkshakes may not have the microbial machinery in their gut to handle normal levels of fiber. And so you just have to go slow. So a bunch of videos talking about like beans and flatulence or higher fiber foods and flatulence in bloating, those kind of symptoms in general. And it's all about going slow. And it turns out most people actually don't have a problem at all. You can actually randomize people. I think the randomized people to chickpeas or carrots. Carrots were like the placebo because they wanted to give people something, but we wouldn't expect carrots to cause anything. And I think if I remember correctly, most people actually did not suffer any gastrointestinal effects of all of a sudden eating, I forget how many, it was like half a cup or a cup of chickpeas a day. But for this, the minority that did actually experience excessive flatulence, for example, it disappeared within a few weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks. I forget. Again, check out the video, type in flatulence into NutritionFacts and it'll pop right back up. And so you just have to give your gut bacteria time. So the healthy bacteria in your gut are the fiber feeders like Prevotella. They eat fiber, and what do they do with fiber? They create these short chain fatty acids, which heal up the leaky gut, have actually absorbed from our colon into our bloodstream, go up into our brain, have anti-inflammatory effects. That's how, high fiber foods help with things like asthma, have psychiatric effects, it has boosting our immune system, all sorts of wonderful things from these short chain fatty acids. And how do we get them in our body? By having fiber feeding bacteria in our gut. How do we get fiber feeding bacteria in our gut? By eating fiber. And we can foster the growth of the good ones, the bad ones die off. And then we have the best of all worlds. But if you start eating higher fiber foods and experience gastrointestinal stress, what does that mean? What do you have to do? Go slow. Even like starting a spoonful of beans a day, whatever it takes, you just got to get those good bacteria rolling, so they can handle the prebiotics coming down, and then you can build it up to kind of normal human physiology where our colon is just packed with fiber feeding, and we just have this massive production of short chain fatty acids all the time because we're eating fiber 3 times a day. And then we have all these benefits from it, but it may take a while to ramp up, particularly if you had a terrible diet before. All right. I just had there's something in the webinar chat. Just make sure everything's okay. Okay, let's go back. Next question. Okay, I already answered that. Do food intolerances like oxalate, sulfur, and histamine go away when SIBO is cleared? SIBO doesn't have anything to do with food intolerances, but there is a link between leaky gut and food allergies, as I talked about with the anaphylaxis. How can you distinguish SIBO or leaky gut symptoms from ordinary excess bowel activity caused by a plant-based diet? Plant-based diet should not, the only thing in terms of excess bowel activity is more frequent bowel movements, but they should be effortless without, pain, bloating, all those symptoms that one would associate with something like irritable bowel or SIBO. So yeah, you can distinguish it because they shouldn't exist. If you have to take ibuprofen, how can you offset the gut-related side effects by eating more fiber or anything else? Also, is baby aspirin okay for gut health? There was a suggestion maybe that the turmeric might help. And then fiber is the way we seal up the gut, period. So you can eat a really healthy diet. And you can find natural alternatives to ibuprofen. And I have lots of videos, as I said, on painkillers. So for example, ginger works for migraines too, if that's why you're taking ibuprofen. In general, if there is a dietary approach that works as well or better than drugs with only good side effects, we should go for that, in my opinion. Okay, are there any connection between SIBO and leaky gut and autoimmune diseases? How do you know if you have intestinal impermeability or permeability? Is it related to autoimmune disease or food allergies? So yes, leaky gut is associated with food allergies. If your gut is leaky, the bits of food particles can get through, and if you're allergic to it, it can cause a serious, increase your risk of a serious reaction. Also associated with autoimmune disease like celiac disease, of the leaky gut, can increase your risk of celiac disease too, which is an autoimmune disease to gluten. I like the next question. I like the Bro Bowl recipe. Curious, if I put it cooked in the food processor to make it smoother, does that take away nutritional benefits? Okay. So the whole point of roll, the whole point of groats, is intact grains. So when we think of whole grains, we think, oh, whole wheat bread, whole wheat bagels, whole wheat spaghetti. Those are not intact grains. They're whole, meaning they haven't had the fiber stripped from them. And so wait a second, if whole wheat flour has all the fiber of whole wheat berries, the wheat berries, then why does it matter if we flour it or not? Why does it matter if we take oat groats and chop them up into pieces and make steel cutouts? And why does it matter if we take oat groats and flatten them out into rolled oats? It's the same. It's literally the same thing. In fact, why not go instant oats, which is basically like powdered, pre-cooked, tiny little flakes of oats? It's all has the exact same nutritional profile. So what's the problem? The problem is missing the structure. Why does that matter? Because your good gut bacteria eat starch. But we absorb starch in our small intestine when we, if you eat whole wheat flour, all the starch is out there exposed, which is not how it's supposed to be in nature. It's all exposed and it gets absorbed. And so, yeah, the fiber makes it down to a good gut flora, but all that starch is lost for our microbiome. Whereas when we eat food the way nature intended, there are bits. So when you eat nuts, as opposed to nut butter, for example, when you eat nuts, no matter how well you chew, you get these little few millimeter particles that are not broken down. And you have all this nutrition wrapped up. So that's why, for example, it's why nuts are less fattening than nut butters, the exact same amount, because you actually poop out some of the fat because it's all trapped in these little particles. Well, when we eat oat groats or steel cutouts, which are smaller but still better than something like oatmeal, yeah, you chew all you want. You chew your bro all you want, you're still going to get little bits of particles that go down and aren't digested and pack in all this starch, and then makes it down to our colon. And then the colon then the bacteria eat the fiber, release that starch, and then they have this bounty. And so there's this great video I love on NutritionFacts.org where they have people eat the same exact foods, but in two different forms. So they have people eat like chickpeas or hummus, They had people, I forget exactly what they used, but one was kind of in porridge form, one was in whole intact form. And what happened is they like doubled their stool output. Exact same amount of food. Wait a second. Why do they get twice as much stool when you eat the whole intact foods? It's because most of stool, literally more than 50%, is pure bacteria. It's not undigested food, pure bacteria. And so you just doubled the amount of bacteria you make. You had this like the bacteria factory, so many trillions that you actually have this doubled the weight of your stool, because all of a sudden when you chew chickpeas as opposed to hummus, they got all those little bits down there, all that extra starch in the colon, all that super happy bacteria, all that short chain fatty acids, all that health that comes with it. And so you should not put your groats in a food processor. That's the whole point of eating groats, is that undigested bits end up in your colon to then be digested by our good bacteria. Hopefully that made some sense. All right. Do probiotics help cure SIBO? If so, which type is best? Also, is there a way to ensure the probiotics survive stomach acidity? Okay, so your good gut bacteria will grow all on their own as long as you feed them, as long as you don't starve them. So better than probiotics would be prebiotics. So because if you take probiotics and eat the same miserable diet, then they're just going to starve away and die. Right? Because I mean, the reason you don't have a lot of good fiber feeders in your gut is you're not eating enough fiber. So yeah, you could take capsules of fiber feeding bacteria like bifidobacteria, right? And then they'll get into your gut and then they'll just die off because you're not eating fiber. Better is to actually eat fiber like we should every day, fiber-rich foods, and then foster the growth of the few little fiber feeders we have in there. And then we have this, we have a little fermentation vat going down there. And they make their own new probiotics. I mean, they create their own probiotics by just dividing and going crazy. That's the best way to do it. Next question, is there a connection between SIBO and high blood platelets? Not that I know of. What top 2 or 3 practical suggestions should RDs, registered dietitians, make when working with patients with suspect SIBO? Okay, so the first thing you tell them is that for all intents and purposes, there's no such thing as SIBO, right? It doesn't matter whether you have more or less bacteria growing in your small intestine. However, what does matter is symptoms. If you have symptoms, whether you label them SIBO, irritable bowel, whatever you label them, and how best to deal with those symptoms is a high fiber diet. And so what are the top 2 or 3 suggestions? Fiber. That's what I would suggest. But you'd also, well, yeah, and all the other things, low in saturated fat and reducing alcohol, etc. Okay. Having a gut imbalance, SIBO, leaky gut, food insensibility, that's the question. What is a good non-animal source to supply the protein intake when beans and nuts are not tolerated? I hope this may have kind of come through earlier when I didn't get to the whole fiber thing. We want to you say, well, wait a second, I eat beans, I don't feel good, so what can I eat instead of beans? Basically the question. And the answer is you should eat beans, right? Slowly ramp up so you can handle it. That's the best way to do it. In my videos, when I talk about flatulence, I talk about how there are some legumes that are less kind of gassy or bloating than others. I talk about Beano. There's all sorts of ways you can ease that transition to improve your intake. And so, I mean, those really are the plant protein superstars. There's obviously, protein in whole grains and nuts and seeds as well. Can SIBO be healed by fecal transplants? So fecal transplants are ways of kind of swapping out the gut in your the bacteria in your colon, not in your small intestine. And SIBO is not something to be healed because SIBO doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we have bacteria growing in your small intestine, because whether we do or not, based on tests that actually can tell, which is this putting a tube down your throat, Some people have bacteria growing at high and more or less in their small intestine, and it doesn't matter in terms of correlation with symptoms. So nothing to be healed, but what could be healed is the dysbiosis, having not enough good bacteria throughout your gastrointestinal tract, and that's healed by eating healthy fiber-containing foods. Can PCOS, polycystic ovaries, cause leaky gut? Not that I'm aware. Should we avoid gluten or saturated fats like coconut oil to help with SIBO leaky gut? Avoiding saturated fats, reducing fat intake in general should improve leaky gut. And gluten, there are basically 3 groups of individuals that should be concerned about gluten-containing foods. About 1 in 1,000 people have actually a formal wheat allergy. So it actually has nothing to do with gluten, but they're actually just allergic to other things in wheat. And so they would avoid what's typically not thought of as gluten-containing foods. And then there's people with celiac disease. 140 or so Americans have this autoimmune disease where your body attacks, basically kind of attacks yourself when you eat gluten, and the only cure or the only treatment of celiac disease is lifelong, strict, extremely strict gluten exclusion. So you're cutting out all wheat, barley, rye products from your diet. And I have lots of videos on these, of course. There's non-celiac gluten insensitivity, where people, even though they do not have celiac disease, which is diagnosed with an intestinal biopsy, they experience symptoms when they eat gluten. And you can actually prove that's the case by randomizing people to, for example, rice flour capsules versus wheat flour capsules. And it turns out most people who think they're gluten insensitive actually aren't and can't actually tell. But there is a small percentage, probably on the order of 1% of people that are have this non-celiac gluten insensitivity. And for those people, reducing gluten should reduce those symptoms. So that could be as many as 2%, about 1% celiac, 1% non-celiac. So about 1 in 50 people may feel better cutting gluten out, but for the other 49 out of 50 people, I would continue to urge them to eat healthy gluten-containing foods like, rye berries, etc. All right. Okay. Does the quantity of food per meal affect SIBO/IBS symptoms? Is it better to have 3 normal meals or more smaller meals spread throughout the day? I don't think it should matter. But it's interesting. I do talk about meal frequency in a chapter in How Not to Diet, though the emphasis is on weight loss rather than have anything to do with like irritable bowel symptoms. And basically, I think I remember that it's better not to snack. Particularly if you're eating junky foods. I think they gave people like orange juice between meals or with meals, and actually get significant increased body fat having orange juice between meals, even though the exact same amount of orange juice, but just having it between meals. So basically increasing the frequency of caloric intake, they had significantly increased body fat, if I remember correctly. Okay, how do we encourage healthy, resilient, diverse microbiomes? Oh, in all areas of our bodies, including mouth, eyes, vaginal canals, and vulvas, ears, sinuses, and feet. What about our foot microbiome? That's a great question. I do have videos coming up. Microbiome, when I talk about the microbiome, I'm usually talking about the gut microbiome, but we actually have different microbiomes. We have a skin microbiome, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I do have videos coming up talking about the oral microbiome and how critically important it is to have specific bacteria on your tongue and what you can do to improve the microbiome in your mouth, like tongue scraping. Actually turns out the tongue scraping may actually be a good idea. I got a whole series of videos coming out that's a little sneak peek. Maybe I should do a whole webinar on it. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, Unfortunately, we are out of time. I just want to thank everyone so much for joining. Hope you learned a ton. I know I certainly did. When I went into this, I knew very little about SIBO, just because we weren't taught about it in medical school, but it was nice to actually see because I get that question a lot. So thank you for giving me the excuse to dive into a topic that I wasn't aware of, so I could share it with you. And thanks everyone. Stay safe, be kind, get vaccinated, and eat your veggies.